She has been on television for the better part of a decade, hours, literal hours of her life. The breakdowns, the glow-ups, the heartbreaks, the surgeries, the daughters, the sister, the parents, the proposals, the rejections, the comebacks. Darcey Silva has given this audience what felt like a live autobiography, and unedited, played out across multiple shows on the same network. She is one of the most documented women in reality television history, which is exactly why what is surfacing right now is landing with the kind of force that makes you stop scrolling and actually pay attention. Because when someone tells you everything, when that is literally their entire brand, the thing they did not tell you becomes the loudest thing in the room. And right now, something Darcey never mentioned is talking, directly to the media, on record. And it is being very, very specific. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Tell-All Tapes. We cover the 90-day universe the way it deserves to be covered. Hit that like button right now, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell, because what we are about to walk through today is one of those stories that you are going to want to have seen before it fully breaks. You do not want to be the person catching up on this one after the fact. Now let's get into it. To understand why this matters as much as it does, you have to understand who Darcey Silva actually is, not just as a character on a reality show, but as a construction, a brand, a carefully assembled public identity that has been built and rebuilt over years of television. And the foundation of that brand is the absolute bedrock of it is family. Not romance, not fashion, not the drama, though there has been plenty of that. Family. Her daughters, Aniko and Aspen, have been on camera since they were small children, absorbing the emotional turbulence of their mother's love life with a grace that honestly deserves its own documentary. Her twin sister Stacey is not just a supporting character. She is practically a co-lead, a mirror image who has been beside Darcey through every high and every devastating low. Her parents have appeared on screen. Family dinners have been filmed. Family conversations have aired. Family opinions have shaped plot lines and storylines across seasons of multiple shows. This is not a woman who keeps her family in the background. Family is the foreground. Family is the entire frame. So when I tell you that a family connection, a documented, verifiable, specific family connection, has apparently existed this entire time without ever appearing in this extraordinarily thorough tapestry of family life, I need you to sit with what that actually means. It does not mean it was forgotten. It does not mean it was accidentally left out of the edit. A 10-year omission is not an accident. It is a decision. And decisions of that magnitude always have reasons. The reasons are what we are here to talk about. Let me walk you through the architecture of why this story is so specifically dangerous for Darcey at this particular moment. Because timing in reality television is everything, and the timing of this is not neutral. Darcey and Stacey are not casual reality television personalities at this point. They are a franchise. Their show has run for multiple seasons. They have business ventures, beauty lines, public appearances, brand partnerships. They are not just people on television, they are enterprises. And enterprises have infrastructure, contracts, agreements, ongoing relationships with networks and production companies that come with expectations of transparency. When you sign on to do a show about your life, your family, your relationships, your personal history, there is an implicit and often explicit agreement that the version of your life being presented is accurate and complete. This is not a small thing. This is the entire premise of the reality television contract, that we are watching something real. And networks take that premise seriously, not always for noble reasons, but for practical ones. The moment the reality of the reality show becomes contested, the entire product becomes something different, something harder to sell, harder to defend, harder to renew. Now, here is where the contradiction becomes what I would call a trap. And I want you to understand this structure because it is elegant in a brutal sort of way. If the connection that sources are describing is what they say is a real, verifiable, documentable biological connection to the Silva family, then it falls into a very specific category. It is not a distant acquaintance. It is not a childhood friend who drifted away. It is not an ex-boyfriend or a business associate or a neighbor from 15 years ago. Sources are describing something that would, by definition, have been present in the background of every single family story Darcey has ever told on camera. Every holiday reference, every childhood memory, every conversation about family values and family bonds and what family means to her. Every single one of those moments now exists in a different context than the one in which it aired. And here is the trap. Darcey has two options, and neither of them is clean. Option 1. She acknowledges the connection. She speaks about it. She gives it the emotional, vulnerable, camera-ready treatment that she has always given to the other difficult things in her life. The problem with this option is the first question it generates, which is not actually a question. It is an indictment dressed as a question. And that question is, why now? 10 years of television, hundreds of hours of intimate conversation about family, multiple shows specifically designed around the theme of who she is and where she comes from. And it never came up? That is not an explanation that fits neatly into a single Instagram caption or a talking head interview. That is a story that requires a very specific kind of storytelling to navigate. And even if Darcey does it perfectly, even if she gives the most emotionally resonant, empathetic, beautifully framed explanation in the history of reality television confessionals, the underlying question does not go away. It just gets quieter. It never disappears. Option 2. She denies or minimizes. She says the connection is being mischaracterized, or the significance is being overstated, or the people speaking to the media do not have the full picture. The problem with this option, and it is a significant problem, is what happens when the evidence keeps talking. Sources are not describing this as a vague rumor. They are describing a recorded interview, they are describing photographs, they are describing documentation. If Darcey chooses minimization, while simultaneously the recorded material starts finding its way into public channels, and the photographs start surfacing, and the documentation starts being verified, every day that the minimization holds against mounting contrary evidence is a day the story compounds. Stories that compound are exponentially harder to contain than stories that are addressed head-on. The math is not in her favor. There is no clean lane here. That is not a commentary on Darcey as a person. It is a structural reality of the situation she appears to be in. There are only degrees of complication, and the question is which degree she ends up navigating. Now let's talk about the professional stakes, because I think they are being underestimated in the early commentary I've seen on this. Reality television talent, especially talent at the level of franchise building talent, signs agreements that are more complex than most people realize. Disclosure requirements, background check authorizations, conflict of interest clauses. These agreements exist because networks have been burned before by talent whose public life turned out to be materially different from their disclosed life, with consequences that played out publicly and expensively. Productions do not assume they know everything about the people they're filming. They ask, they verify, they have people whose entire job is making sure that the version of reality they're capturing is not going to blow up in a way that creates legal or reputational liability for the network. If a significant family connection was consistently omitted from those disclosures, not because it was unknown to the people doing the disclosing, but because it was actively compartmentalized, that creates a specific kind of contractual question. Not necessarily a catastrophic one, depending on the specifics, but a question that does not get resolved with a phone call and an apology. A question that involves lawyers and conversations that do not happen on camera. TLC has navigated complicated talent situations before. They are not new to the reality that their talent is human, and humans have complicated lives, and complicated lives sometimes include chapters that did not make it into the pitch. They have shown a capacity for flexibility when the complication is manageable and the talent is valuable. But they have also shown a very consistent directional preference when situations become unmanageable. They move away from the complication. They do not lean into stories that put the integrity of their programming in question. They quietly, professionally, efficiently create distance. Darcey and Stacey are valuable to TLC. That is not in dispute. Multiple seasons, ongoing audience, a franchise that has expanded rather than contracted. Value is real. But value has limits, and the limit is always the point at which maintaining the relationship costs more than ending it. Right now, no one knows where that line is for this particular situation. The people who do know are in rooms that do not have cameras in them. I want to do a behavioral analysis here because I think it is genuinely the most important piece of this entire story, and it is the part that most of the coverage I've seen is glossing over in favor of the more sensational surface elements. Darcey Silva is a compartmentalizer. This is not an insult. It is an observation, and it is actually one of the more compassionate ways to understand how she has navigated what has objectively been an emotionally difficult public life. She has shown us, season after season, that she keeps things in boxes. The box that is open for the cameras is full and real and genuinely vulnerable. The heartbreak is real, the tears are real, the hope is real. But there are clearly boxes that have never been opened, that has been kept sealed and kept separate and kept away from the narrative she was constructing in real time. For people who have experienced significant family pain, and there are many of them, and they are in this audience right now, compartmentalization is not a character flaw. It is a survival mechanism. It is the thing that lets you keep functioning, keep building, keep showing up when there is something too painful or too complicated or too loaded to process in the open. You put it in a box. You put the box somewhere safe. You live your life around the box rather than with it. The problem, and this is the behavioral insight that matters, is that compartmentalization as a life strategy only works while you control all the boxes. The entire system depends on the assumption that the things inside the sealed boxes stay inside the sealed boxes. The moment someone else has access to your history with their own memories of the events that went into the box, the moment that person decides to open the box themselves and describe what's inside to other people and show people what they found in there, the organizational system collapses. Not because the box was opened, because you built your life around the assumption that it never would be. And that is what appears to be happening right now. A box is being opened, not by Darcey, by someone else. Someone who has their own relationship to what's inside it. Someone who has decided, for their own reasons and on their own timeline, that the box should no longer be sealed. The response, when it comes, and there will be a response, eventually, in some form will almost certainly center on pain. the pain of complicated family situations, the pain of choosing what to share publicly and what to protect, the pain of living a public life while still trying to maintain some interior private space. And I want to be clear, all of those things are legitimate. Family estrangements and complicated family histories are real. They are not owed to any audience, regardless of how much of yourself you have otherwise shared. There is a genuine argument to be made that certain things belong to the person who lived them and no one else. But here's the thing, and this is the part that I think is going to be the hardest for Darcey to address, and the part that her audience is going to sit with longest after the initial story fades. She has never used that logic before. She has never said, "This part of my life is mine and I'm protecting it." She has never drawn that boundary, not around the breakups, not around the medical procedures, not around the financial pressures that have surfaced over the years, not around the moments of self-doubt that she has shared with what felt like honesty. She has given this audience things that most people would never share with strangers. Deep, intimate, sometimes uncomfortable things. She drew exactly one curtain. One. In a life that has otherwise been almost entirely transparent. And the question that is now impossible to avoid is why this specific thing was behind that specific curtain. Why did everything else make it onto camera, but this did not? What is it about this particular connection, this particular chapter, that required the level of deliberate omission that a decade of consistent non-mention represents? That is not a question that answers itself with a tearful confessional. That is a question with a specific answer that will have to come from a specific place. And wherever it comes from, and whatever it says, it will be evaluated against 10 years of apparent contradiction. Now I have to talk about what sources are actually describing, because this is the part that moves this from speculation to something with specific documentable weight. What has been shared, and I am being careful here, as I always am, to only reference things that have been cross-referenced before they get mentioned on this channel, is that a person with a described biological connection to the Silva family has given a recorded interview to an outlet that covers the 90-day universe specifically. This is not a tabloid with a history of fabrication. This is a publication that the audience of this channel knows. That specificity matters. In that recorded interview, according to people who have been given access to portions of it, this individual does not speak in vague terms. They reference specific family events. They describe shared experiences with enough detail that the description functions as a kind of verification in itself, the kind of detail that you cannot construct without having been present. They have presented photographs, and those photographs have been looked at by people who are in a position to evaluate what they're looking at. The outlet that has this material is not rushing. They are not throwing it up without due diligence. They are working through a process, and that process takes time. And that time is the clock that is currently running in the background of everything Darcey posts, everything Stacey posts, every appearance they make, every interview they give. Every day that passes is a day closer to the moment when the outlet decides the process is complete and the story is ready. That moment has not happened yet, but it is coming. And the people around Darcey, the inner circle, the management, whoever is in that conversation, either know it is coming or are about to find out. I want to close this first part with something that I think is the thematic heart of this entire story, because I think it is the thing that is going to resonate longest and I want to give it the weight it deserves. Darcey Silva has spent the better part of a decade on television pursuing one thing above all others. Not fame exactly, not money exactly, something more specific and more human than either of those. She has been pursuing the feeling of being chosen, of being wanted, of being included fully, without reservation, without asterisks in someone's story. She crossed oceans for men who were not worth the airfare. She invested emotional capital in relationships that were clearly mismatched from the outside, because the possibility of being chosen was worth the risk of being wrong. She has told us this directly, in her own words. The longing is real, and it has been one of the most genuinely sympathetic things about her public persona. This visible, almost aching desire to belong completely to someone's life, and to have them belong completely to hers. And now we are looking at the possibility of the emerging, documented, sourced possibility that there is a family connection she herself chose not to include in her own story. A person who belongs to her history, whether she has acknowledged that history or not. A person who is now telling their own version of a story that Darcey has been telling for 10 years without them in it. The irony of that is not something I can make lighter than it is. A woman who has searched so publicly and so painfully for belonging, potentially having made a choice that is the mirror image of the wound she has been trying to heal. That is not gossip. That is a genuine human complexity. And it is the thing that, when this story fully surfaces, is going to make it hit differently than any of the other controversies in her career. We will be here when it breaks. We will be here with the full context, the full timeline, and the full analysis. Make sure your notification bell is on. Make sure you are subscribed, because this is the kind of story that moves fast when it moves, and you do not want to miss the moment. That is part 1. Come back for part 2. We are not done. Let's start with the thing that most people are not talking about yet, which is the internal family dimension of this story. Because so far the conversation has been centered on Darcey, her omission, her brand, her contractual exposure, her response options, and all of that is legitimate and important. But there is a second layer here that is, in some ways, even more complicated than the first, and that layer is Stacey. Stacey Silva is not a peripheral figure in this story. She cannot be. By definition, she cannot be. She is Darcey's twin sister, not a half-sibling, not a step-sibling, not a cousin who was close enough to feel like a sibling, a twin. A person who shares Darcey's biology, her childhood, her family history, her parents, and by extension, any family connection that belongs to the Silva family tree. Whatever the connection that sources are describing actually is, whatever its specific nature and origin, it exists in relation to Stacey, just as it exists in relation to Darcey. Which means there are 2 possibilities, and both of them are significant. The first possibility is that Stacey knew that this was not Darcey's secret alone, but a shared family decision, a collective agreement, conscious or unspoken, to maintain a specific version of the Silva family story in the public eye while keeping this particular chapter sealed. If that is the case, then the show that TLC has been broadcasting is built explicitly on the premise of the Silva twins sharing everything with each other and with the audience, was built on a foundation that had a very deliberate gap in it. The intimacy that makes that show work, the twin bond vulnerability that is its central selling point, was being performed in the context of a shared omission that the audience was never invited into. That is a complicated thing to reckon with. Not because secrets are inherently wrong. Families have secrets, always have, always will. But because the product being sold was radical openness. And radical openness with an asterisk is a different product than the one being advertised. The second possibility is that Stacey did not know. Darcey maintained this compartment not just from the cameras and the audience, but from her own twin sister, the person who is, by every public account, her closest human relationship, the person she has called her other half, the person who has been physically present for almost every significant moment in Darcey's documented adult life. I want you to think about what it would mean to keep something of this nature from someone who is that close to you. Not just the logistics of it, though the logistics are genuinely difficult to imagine, given how intertwined their lives are, but the emotional weight of it. The daily texture of being that close to someone while carrying something they do not know. The specific kind of loneliness that requires. Because that is what it is. Whatever the reason, whatever the circumstances that made the compartment feel necessary, maintaining it in the context of that relationship would have required a very particular kind of internal experience that most people cannot fully imagine. And if Stacey did not know if the revelation that is coming reaches her the same way it reaches the audience, through a media story rather than through her sister, the impact on that relationship is not something that gets resolved in a single conversation. Twin relationships that have been described the way this one has been described publicly are not casually disrupted, but they are also not immune to the specific kind of rupture that comes from discovering that someone you believed you knew completely was carrying something this significant without you. Either scenario changes the show. Either scenario changes the relationship on camera. Either scenario changes what the audience is watching and what it means. Now, I want to bring in something that I think is genuinely underexplored in the coverage of reality television personalities when stories like this emerge, which is the question of why people in Darcey's specific position make the choices they make when they make them. Because here's what I notice, and what I think the audience of this channel is sophisticated enough to engage with honestly. The narrative around reality television stars who have complicated pasts tends to default very quickly to judgment. She was hiding it. She was lying. She was constructing a false version of herself for profit. And maybe some of that is true in some cases, but I think the more honest and more useful analysis is almost always more complicated than that. People who grow up with painful family situations and the connection being described, whatever its specifics, clearly falls into a category of family pain rather than family joy. Otherwise, it would have been on camera that those people develop relationships to their own history that are not simply about concealment. They are about survival, about what you have to do with certain memories and certain realities in order to keep moving forward, about the stories you have to tell yourself and the stories you have to keep telling the people around you in order to maintain the sense of self that lets you function. Darcey has never given the impression of someone who is calculating in the way that pure concealment for profit would require. She gives the impression consistently, season after season, of someone who is genuinely trying to love, trying to grow, trying to be seen, trying to build something that lasts. The emotional texture of her public life is not the texture of someone running a careful con. It is the texture of someone who is carrying more than she is showing, while simultaneously showing more than almost anyone else would be comfortable showing. That tension between what is shared and what is protected is human. It is recognizable. It is not unique to Darcey Silva, but it is being uniquely exposed right now because of who she is and how she has lived her public life. And I think that deserves to be named before the judgment starts, because the judgment is coming, and it is going to be loud, and it is going to be reductive, and it is going to miss a lot of what is actually true about this situation. Let me talk about the media mechanics of what happens next, because I think understanding the machinery helps make sense of the timeline. The outlet that is reportedly sitting on this recorded interview is not going to move until they are confident in the material. That is not timidity. That is the basic standard of responsible publication. You verify. You authenticate the photographs. You cross-reference the claims in the recorded interview against independently accessible records. You consult legal. You consider the framing. You make decisions about what serves the story and what is gratuitous. This is a process that takes weeks, not days, when done properly. But here is the thing about that process. It is not invisible. The people being asked to verify things know they are being asked. The sources being cross-referenced know they have been contacted. The circle of people who know this story is coming gets wider every day that the verification process continues. And circles, once they expand beyond a certain size, become impossible to fully contain, which means that people in Darcey's orbit, people adjacent to her professional and personal life, may already know something is coming before it is publicly announced. The question of whether that information has reached her directly or whether it is still circling in the outer rings waiting for someone to bring it inward is the question that determines how much time she actually has to make decisions. Because decisions made before a story breaks are categorically different from decisions made after a story breaks. Before the break, you have agency. You have the ability to shape context. You can choose the venue, the framing, the emotional register, the supporting narrative. You can decide who you want standing next to you when you address it, and what you want the first words to be, and what you want people to feel when they hear those words. That is real power. It is limited power. The story is coming regardless. But it is the difference between authoring your own chapter and being written about by someone else. After the break, that power is dramatically reduced. You are responding to someone else's framing. You are walking into a narrative that has already been established, with images that have already been seen, with claims that have already been absorbed by the audience. Responding to an established narrative is fundamentally harder than establishing one. Every public relations professional in the history of the industry has said some version of this. Get ahead of it. The cost of getting ahead is always lower than the cost of reacting. Whether Darcey has the information she would need to get ahead is the variable that no one outside her immediate circle can currently answer. Now I want to return to something I said in the first part of this video and take it further, because I think it deserves a deeper treatment than I gave it. The irony of Darcey's situation, the genuine, aching human irony, is not just about what she did or did not share. It is about what that decision, made over 10 years of consistent omission, says about what she was willing to protect versus what she was willing to expose. She exposed her heartbreaks. She exposed her insecurities about her appearance, her age, her desirability. She exposed her financial strain. She exposed her daughters to the cameras during some of the most turbulent periods of their family life. She exposed moments of genuine psychological vulnerability that most people would have kept private. She gave the audience access to the interior of her pain in ways that are honestly remarkable when you catalog them. And she protected this, whatever this is. She protected it with a consistency and a completeness that everything else in her public life stands in direct contrast to. What does that tell you about what this thing is? What does it say about the nature of the family connection being described that it required a different category of protection than everything else? Because the protection was not casual. It was not a matter of something simply never coming up organically. It was active, maintained, sustained through years of conversations and interviews and confessionals that touched on almost every other aspect of her history. The protection of this specific thing, in the context of everything else she was willing to share, is its own kind of signal. I am not going to tell you what that signal means because I do not know yet, and I am not going to speculate beyond what sources have actually described. But I want you to hold that question in your mind as this story develops, because when the full nature of the connection becomes public, that question, why this, of all things, was the thing that required protecting, will have an answer. And the answer will make everything else make sense in a way that it currently does not. Let's talk about what the audience relationship looks like from here, because I think this is a dimension that is genuinely underestimated by people who are not inside the reality television ecosystem the way that this channel's audience is. Darcey's fans are not casual viewers. They are not people who have watched a few episodes and formed a passing opinion. They are people who have invested years of their viewing lives in her story, who have argued for her, defended her, cringed with her, cheered for her, been frustrated by her, and come back anyway because the emotional connection to her journey is real and it is not easily severed. That is a specific kind of audience relationship, and it carries a specific kind of weight. When an audience of that depth encounters a revelation of this magnitude, there are predictable phases. The first phase is disbelief that this cannot be right. The sources are wrong. The framing is unfair. The second phase is the processing of evidence as the documentation becomes visible and the verification becomes harder to dismiss. The third phase is the emotional renegotiation, where the audience has to figure out how to hold the new information in the same space as the years of investment they have made. That third phase is where the long-term relationship between Darcey and her audience actually gets determined. Not in the moment of revelation, but in the weeks after, when people are quietly deciding what they believe and what it means for how they feel. What Darcey does during that third phase, how she speaks, what she acknowledges, how she treats the people in her audience who feel like they were part of an incomplete picture, will matter enormously. More than the initial response, more than the first statement. The sustained behavior during the renegotiation phase is what determines whether an audience stays or leaves. The people who have stayed through every previous controversy, the men, the surgeries, the business questions, the interpersonal conflicts, they have stayed because they believed in the fundamental authenticity of who Darcey is. Authenticity is the only currency that survives revelations of this kind. If she can access that authenticity genuinely, in her own voice, on her own terms, the audience will likely come with her. If the response feels managed, layered, focus grouped, if it feels like what it is, which is crisis management rather than honest communication, the audience that has been most loyal will be the first to feel it. And the feeling of being managed after years of believing you were being trusted with something real is one of the harder things for a fan base to forgive. I want to be clear about something before I close, and I want to say it directly because I think it is important. This channel exists to cover the 90-day universe honestly and completely. Not to destroy anyone, not to build someone up as a hero or tear someone down as a villain, because reality television has enough of that already, and it does not need another voice doing it. We are here to look at what is happening clearly, to name what it means, and to trust the audience to come to your own conclusions about what you think and how you feel. Darcey Silva is a human being with a complicated life who has chosen, for better or worse, to live a significant portion of that life on camera. That choice has given her a platform and an audience and a career. It has also created a specific kind of accountability that comes with the territory of public life. Those two things cannot be separated. You cannot take the benefits of radical openness and then also expect that the limits of that openness will not eventually become a story. That is not a moral judgment. It is a practical reality of the environment she has chosen to operate in. Whatever the full truth of the situation is, and the full truth is still emerging, still being verified, still making its way through the process that precedes publication, she deserves to have it covered fairly, with context, with the acknowledgement that human beings are complicated, and that complicated human beings sometimes make decisions that are hard to explain from the outside. She also deserves an audience that is sophisticated enough to hold complexity without collapsing it into a simple verdict. And I believe this audience is that. The recording exists, the photographs exist, the documentation is in the process of being authenticated by people who know what they are looking at. The outlet is moving through its process on its own timeline, and Darcey's team, whether they know the specific details yet or not, is operating in a world where this is coming. The point of no return in a story like this is not the publication. It is the recording. Once someone has sat across from a camera or a microphone and described their version of a story, and that recording exists in the hands of a media organization, the story is already in motion. Publication is just the moment it becomes visible to the public. The motion started before that. The motion may have started months ago. For a woman who has always insisted on telling her own story in her own words at her own pace, who has used the camera as her instrument, who has shaped her narrative with the kind of deliberate intentionality that her emotional style can sometimes obscure, the loss of control over this particular chapter is not a minor inconvenience. It is the specific thing that the rest of her public life has been organized to prevent. Whether she finds a way to reclaim that narrative before the outlet moves, or whether she ends up responding to someone else's version of her own story, is the question that will define the next chapter of her public life. And we will be here for every moment of it. If you have watched this far all the way through both parts of this video, then you already know that this channel does not do surface level. We go deep. We stay with stories until they are fully told. We do not move on just because the next drama is ready to distract us. This story is going to continue developing, and when it does, this is where you will get the most complete, most carefully sourced, most contextually honest coverage it is going to get anywhere in this community. So if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now. Not as a favor to this channel, as a favor to yourself, because you do not want to be the person piecing together what happened after the fact. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, Leave a comment below telling me what you think the nature of this connection actually is, because I read every single one of them, and the conversation in the comments on this channel is genuinely one of the sharpest conversations happening in the 90-day community anywhere on the platform. Share this video with someone who follows Darcey and Stacey and does not know this story is developing yet, because the people who know it is coming are going to be the people who understand it when it lands. We will be back the moment this moves. Stay close, stay subscribed, stay sharp. This has been the Tell All Tapes. I will see you in the next one.